So welcome to colleagues who've joined us live in a very, very rainy day here in Loughborough. So anybody who has made it here because they are very keen to be here. And we are delighted to welcome you to this space. And to those who are joining us online, I point out again to those who are joining online that we do have both a chat and a Q&A function, and please use them so that the conversation after the talk can be as rich as possible, inclusive of people who are joining us online. So welcome to the virtual IAS. My name is Marcia Meskimen. I'm the director of the Institute of Advanced Studies here in Loughborough University, and we are really thrilled today to be welcoming our two fellows, Predrag Cvetičanin and Željka Zdravković, who are joining us as part of the fantastic project called Invent, a Horizon 2020 project that they will be talking about. I'm shortly going to turn over to my colleague Adrian Magona to actually give them a slightly more detailed introduction, because he is hosting and he is part of the conversations that are ongoing around this project. But I want to say on behalf of the IAS that we're very excited to be learning about this project, particularly because we look specifically at the IAS to develop international collaborations and projects. And this project brings together scholars from the Netherlands, France, Denmark, Spain, Finland, Great Britain, Switzerland, Croatia, and Serbia. And this is a fantastic project in terms of really thinking about what it means to do international collaborative research and to think very precisely about how that has an impact on social policy and social life. And so we are thrilled to actually be able to welcome this project as being very much in keeping with what we like to do here at the IAS. And we are very happy to be hosting you and hope that your time with us is most enjoyable. Adrian, if I could turn to you to do a more formal introduction.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thank you to our colleagues from the Institute for having us today in this rainy day. So I'm not gonna steal Željka's and Predrag's partners. I'm not gonna say much about it itself, but I'm just gonna say a couple of words about what is, from my point of view, most important things about the work that Invent is doing. And I'm gonna maybe include myself, not necessarily as part of the project, but as part of the work that we do when researching cultural class analysis, more broadly speaking, and what are the potential applications that such analysis has in multiple areas. So perhaps one of the most pressing questions that we're going to try to answer is, what is culture? So what do we measure when we are interested in studying cultural participation, cultural taste, cultural policy? What is going to be funded, or what is actually worth of any sort of attention? And we always struggle with this tension in terms of what is possible to measure, and things that are eventually possible to say a bit more about them, in order to convince potentially funders and the policy sector that certain activities are actually more of attention. And then what actually people does. I mean, we all are, of course, not just scholars working in this field, but we will also do things, do culture, have interest outside work. So the challenge is actually, how we take into consideration all these multiple forms of social change in order to have as broad as possible definition of culture, and I would probably say multiple definitions of culture, not just unique, something as diverse as possible and as inclusive as possible. So in that sense, I think that the Invent project has amazing potential to inform what we're doing, not just within the European context, but outside of it, and in general, to inform all these conversations that we're having. Some of them sociological, others from policy, or many other multiple sectors. So that's all I want to say, and that's the reason why I'm so excited actually to hear the results. So now let's use it to be a formal presentation. So we'll start with Željka Zdravković. So Željka is assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Zadar and research associate at the Institute of Social Science in Croatia. Her scholarly interest in the lines between cultural consumption, lifestyle, and social inequality with strong emphasis on conservative research methods. The previous working projects on youth, women, and social inequalities been published in several articles. He holds an MA in psychology and a PhD in sociology of regional and local development from the University of Zadar and the University of Milano in Italy. Dr. Predrag Cvetičanin is associate professor at the Faculty of Arts, University of Niš, Serbia. He's also director of the Independent Research Institute Center for Empirical Cultural Studies of Southeastern Europe. He received MA degrees from Central European University, University of Belgrade, London School of Economics, and holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Belgrade. He has coordinated a large number of national and international research projects and published numerous scientific articles on 14 books dealing with issues regarding cultural participation, household strategies, informal practices, and social inequalities in Southeast European societies. So, Predrag, welcome. Where is yours?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us. And as Marsha mentioned, we will present a project, Horizon 2020 project, European Inventory of Societal Values of Cultural Basis for Inclusive Cultural Policies in Globalizing World. Basically, two of us will present a work of what more than 40 researchers does from 9 countries. And it started in February 2020, and it will last until July 23, 42 months. Project is really a huge one. And Marsha asked me about how it developed. In 2018, there was this European EU agenda for culture. And for the first time after decades of speaking about creative industries, job creation, profits, and so on, they started speaking about things that we think are more appropriate for culture. They were saying that emerging from a severe economic crisis, Europe is facing growing social inequalities, diverse population, populism, radicalization, terrorist threats, and so on. And that new technologies are transforming societies, and that role of culture is more important than ever in such circumstances. And the call that we applied with this project was called Societal Values in Culture and the Impact of Cultural Policies, and basically repeat some of these things that culture is an important element of public policy for social, cultural, political vision and inclusion throughout European history. That although today it was very often seen from the angle of economic value, that culture had additional societal values in terms of well-being, promoting identity, belonging, inclusiveness, and so on. So, and they asked for ways of measuring this and ways of capturing wider societal value of culture and offering convincing vision of citizens to cope with this transformation. So our first thought was, if you want to produce a convincing vision of how to deal with these circumstances, you cannot really stay only on the level of arts and creative industries. You have to go broader, and you have to do the analysis of the changes which occurred in the last 30 years. And obviously, world really changed. One of the advantages of being old is to remember the world before internet, before globalization in full force, and so on. So it's really quite a different world. My sons cannot imagine a world without internet and so on. But I remember the world that way. So there was huge changes in the last 30 years in terms of how globalization, digitalization, increasing social inequalities changed our world. But basically, when you analyze cultural policy, you see that they remain the same as they were in the 80s. Nothing substantially changed in the way cultural policy were crafted and done. So we thought that first we need to understand how this megatrend changed social and cultural life in Europe, and to ask citizens about it, not to rely on macro analysis, but to ask citizens how they perceive these changes. So we use this bottom up. And we also wanted, one of the things that we would like to introduce is this social turn in cultural policy. meaning start thinking that culture is something which should produce profits. Of course it should, but should not be the main task of culture. Nor the job creation, nor this sort of stuff. There are more important things that culture can do. So one of the things that we would like to do is to change the direction of culture policy towards producing culture which cares about inclusion, diversity, well-being, and so on. And also one of the starting points was this awareness that basically there are manifold definitions of culture. Even in this new European agenda for culture in 2018, they were speaking about problems which culture can deal with at the level of anthropological notion of culture, way of life in a community. But their solutions were at the level of arts, more mobility for artists, enabling cultural participation. And it was clear for us that you cannot go from A to B. In order to solve solutions at the way of life level, you need solutions which are appropriate for that. And there are, I mean, from Raymond Williams, that it's one of the most complicated words in English language. It is what everything what culture includes. Graeber and Platform, 164 definitions of culture. But also there was an anecdote. I remember Colin Mercer he's one of the top cultural policy theorists. And he was doing a cultural policy strategy for some city in Australia, he's on Australia. And he was in front of some cultural center, and there was a person from, I think, Vietnam. And he entered the place, House of Culture, Center of Culture, and entered and left immediately. And as they're asking why, he said, House of Culture, Cultural Center, but it was only artists. So for him, culture was something completely different. So first, let's try to see what is culture. And this is the meaning of our logo. In this culture iceberg, there are things that are easy to see, like fine arts, popular arts, dress, food, and which I usually research. But then there are deeper layers of cultural iceberg, like notions of modesty, like child-rearing practices, like body language, which I usually not research. So we are aware that there are many different notions of culture, and one of the things that we try to do is to analyze, to identify all these different notions of culture. And we are also in methodological terms against methodological nationalism. The idea that you can formulate culture and run cultural policy within the national container, it's really old-fashioned. You know, in a united Europe or in a globalizing world, obviously there are influences which go beyond national states and national culture. So in many social sciences, methodological nationalism is out of date. But in cultural policy, it's still present. We use a variety of methods. It's a multi-method and mixed method research design. We did survey more than 14,000 respondents, then 250 semi-structured interviews, half of them with European migrants, 36 focal groups doing at the moment. There are 9 countries, so 4 per country, 27 case studies dealing with very successful or very unsuccessful stories in cultural policy, then a smartphone study. I will tell you maybe more after that with 200 respondents, and 3 ways of big data scraping from Twitter, Facebook, etc. So variety of methods, and hopefully everything will fit together. We promised like 8 articles in major journals, a book in which theoretical and empirical results will be presented, then policymakers guidebook, in which we will try to show what are the implications of our study for cultural policy, and finally this European inventory for cultural policy, social values of culture, which is sort of an e-dictionary. If somebody of you read this pop play by Cortázar, it's a book that you can read from any chapter. You don't have to read it from the beginning to the end. So this is the idea of this e-dictionary. You can search, then you can ask, for example, what we can do if we want to perform cultural decentralization, and then the dictionary we will interlink these entries, and the dictionary will guide you This is the idea. This is the idea. And we will present briefly, just sketches of 3 papers that we are working on at the moment. None of them completely finished. The first is how social inequalities influence different types of cultural practices at the same time. And these are the co-authors besides me and Željka, Predrag Cvetičanin and Lukáš Pereira from École Normale Supérieure, and Inga Tomić-Koludrović from Institute of Social Sciences in Finland. And the starting point for this paper is that basically in 1990s, the studies of social inequality and digital inequality were completely separated. Different people, different terminology, different research topics. Only few people belong to the both tradition, like Paul DiMaggio and Mike Savage sometimes wrote about those two districts. But gradually these two traditions came together. So the first digital divide was about access, and second digital divide about the ability to use internet IT technology. And the third really started to wonder what are the inequalities and what are the benefits that comes from the use of social benefits that comes from the use of internet technology. And on the other hand, those who research social inequalities became aware that there is digital inequality which is really important. So these two traditions are now very close, and especially for the Asian approach to dealing with social inequality, the digital and social inequalities. And also they discuss some of them, the issues of maybe new capitals like technological capital, techno capital, and digital capital. We think that it's not necessary. There is this article by Jean-Luc Lacan, and he noticed the tendency to multiply capitals like emotional capital, sexual capital, ethnic capital, digital capital, and fields. But if you look at the digital capital, you really see that it's a subspecies of cultural capital. It has the embodied form, which are the abilities to use IT. It has the objective form, which is IT technology access and so on. And it has institutional form, which are all these IT faculties and courses and so on. So the Ragneda, for example, thinks that it's a bridging capital, which bridge online and offline social changes, but it's not difficult. It's not different from cultural capital. It's a special form of cultural capital, maybe the most important form today, but nothing new. No need for new capital, which is different. New, but no need for new invented new capital. And in this paper, we have these two research questions: do social inequalities in terms of income, possessions, education, parents' education, citizen migrant status, and so on, do they influence differently for different types of cultural practices? Offline artistic practices, offline everyday practices, everyday culture practices, online artistic practices, and online everyday cultural practices. But let me say at the beginning, this is very conventional division, and we will argue that basically this distinction between online and offline realms is now a false distinction. That they are so much intertwined today that it's almost impossible to treat them separately. But this is how it's usually done. I mean, we wanted to see whether social inequalities influence them in different ways. And the second research question, which aspect of social inequalities influence them more, whether it's economic capital, cultural capital, digital abilities. And these are the dependent variables. First, for offline related, art related activities, like do they practice amateur art, like singing, playing, making photos, and so on. Attending classical musical concerts, attending popular musical concerts, visiting museums, monuments, and so on. This would be offline art-related practices. And because we wanted to capture these everyday cultural activities which belong to the anthropological notion of culture, we also included these do-it-yourself activities, doing sports, visiting recreation areas, doing handcraft or handicraft, visiting local fairs for food and music and so on. And when it comes to online everyday activities, includes communicate or share things with people that you know, playing, using sharing service platforms, follow celebrities and influencers, or when it comes to online art related, listening music, watch films, watch online concerts. And then we have this set of independent variables: age, place of residence, education, income, possession, parental education, and something that we call digital index. We also include information whether they were born in a country or they are migrants, but in the analysis it's going to be completely unequal. So we didn't include it in the analysis. And this is the data about the internet access. In all countries about 80%, in most countries about 90%. So the first digital divide is not important. But what we think is important is the second digital divide, the ability to use digital technology, and we have the data for three aspects: ability to use digital technology, variety to use digital technology, and frequency of use of digital technology. We use this information to perform multiple perspectives analysis and then hierarchical cluster analysis, and got these four groups. Group one is the one which doesn't have the abilities necessary to handle digital technology, and group four is some those who are experts at this. And we performed linear regression model on these four different, using independent variables in these four different types of online practices, and this is what we got. And I will go one by one to see how it works because it's too small. So first, offline cultural practices very much influenced by cultural capital, especially by cultural capital respondents. Secondly, by inherited capital of their parents. Women are more committed to offline art-related activities, and people who are retired, 65 plus, they perform most of all offline activities, both art-related and everyday life. And what we noted is that there is a huge impact of university education. So the impact of education is not linear. Those who have the high school education, though, but their practices are rather similar to those with the elementary education. But there is a leap between them and those who have university education. Plus, it's likely that because two middle-aged, let's say middle-aged generations, they are the ones who perform least of these activities. So it looks like that it's not money that is missing, it is time that is missing. The cultural participation is really endangered by the lack of time. In place of residence also plays a role. People who live in cities, they perform less offline everyday activities. They don't do it yourself, they don't do handiwork, they don't recreate as much as those who live in rural areas. When it comes to online cultural practices, and it's well known, age is the factor which determines the most, and it goes linearly. So older they get, less practices, online practices, especially those which are everyday related. And the place of residence is also important, probably related to the first digital divide, that people in the rural areas have less success with digital technologies and they use them less. More of them in especially in cities, more even than those in capital cities. And the level of education is also important, as I mentioned, especially university education. A huge difference between those who have high school and university education. And when it comes to inherited cultural capital, the education of parents, it also positively affects art-related online activities. Total household income and total possession do not play a major role in none of these activities, and we have to test this because they should for offline activities especially. In terms of online activities, the income is effective on the lowest level of income, preventing people, I guess, from buying the equipment, and the highest level of income when they can afford to buy the best possible equipment, and also their job is very often linked with their online activities. In general, Regression model has a much higher prediction capacity for non-participation, which is expected. Social inequalities affect exclusion from cultural life. So this is, in our case, this is clear that non-participation is better predicted by inequalities. Also, online activities are much better predicted than offline activities. But we have to test this again because it might be the effect of the sampling method. In Croatia and Serbia, we did face-to-face. In most of the other countries, people did internet, panel plus telephone. So it might be that the fact that the way that we collected data affected that internet activities or online activities are predicted better. Age, as I mentioned, is inversely proportional to the intensity of the activities. Older people get, in this case, maybe internet natives won't be in the same position 20, 30 years from now. But those who are now 40 and over 65 and over, they use less of these online activities. But as I mentioned, the old generation is the one which is most active in offline activities, both everyday and art related. So they are the ones who really participate. When it comes to place of residence, online activities in villages are restricted, probably because lack of access. But everyday cultural activities are much more present in rural areas than in urban areas. Economic capital, as I mentioned, need additional testing. Usually it goes that economic capital, income and possession, and especially income, influence cultural participation, but not so much taste. That cultural capital influence both taste and participation, but more taste. And in this case, only income proved to be important on the lowest and highest level. And then cultural capital with a huge impact, especially, I mean, we found it in previous studies, but it was really clear. University education matters. This is something where really cultural openness, inclusiveness, and so on is at least enacted, or if not inspired. And one of the things which turned out to be a surprise is that the variable with predictive powers, with the strongest predictive powers, turned out to be the digital index. But not just for online activities, but for offline activities as well. Again, partially because of the sampling method. Conclusions for this part, that we can use, it turns out to be used for both online, offline, art-related, everyday activities. You can use the same set of predictors. They don't go into the same direction, they influence differently these activities, but the same type of predictors can be used. The digital index, or the ability to use IT technology, proved to be an important predictor for offline activities. So it means that it has to be included even in on-site cultural participation studies, not just studying online participation. And in general, as I mentioned, it looks like that online, offline is a dichotomy without reflecting. They are so much intertwined that it's impossible to separate them. These two research traditions definitely has to at least learn about each other and start doing things together. So this is my first part of presentation, and now my colleague Željka will speak about the influence of cultural capital on perception and effect of globalizing process.
So in this paper, this is also a working process, I would say. We try to analyze the influence of cultural capital on perception of the effect of globalizing processes in these 9 countries. We did it with the colleague Tomić Koludović, Petrić, and Dali Kacvero. In this paper, we actually focusing on cultural aspect of globalization, and globalization as a multidimensional phenomenon that encompasses not only economic but also cultural, ideological, political, and similar other facets. But we try to focus more on cultural aspects. The aspect that is it did not have that much I'd say attention, although it has its own field, concepts, and theories. Author Crane says that there is three types of theories that have dominated this field. Theories concerning the effect of culture, globalization on national cultures, and these about cultural media, imperialism, cultural homogenization, civilization, internalization, localization, and so on. Theories about concerning transnational networks and flows through which global cultural globalization is taking place. And theories concerning emergence of world culture and global civil society, and in that sense, we are more focused in this aspect of the world culture and cosmopolitanism. So we are trying to focus more on the term of cosmopolitanism. In this sense, we can see cosmopolitanism as more, I would say, willingness or orientation and willingness to engage with other. It has intellectual and aesthetic stance of openness toward divergent cultural experience. And at the same time, cosmopolitanism can be seen not just as orientation, but as a competence or a set of body of cultural skills that help us navigate and maneuver within particular system of meanings and meaning forms in different cultures. And Robert Merton first actually used the concept of cosmopolitan, studying the pattern of influence in American small towns, and he was actually talking about local and cosmopolits and how they actually influence. Have influence on community, and locals were more rested on a social capital and who they know, and the other ones, the cosmopolitans, were more relied on new knowledge and skills, and we can say cultural capital and the skills that are more have currency, I would say, in currency which is globally valued, not just locally, not just immersed in the specific community settings. We actually try to establish the link between level and type of culture. Capital with perception of effect that globalizational processes have in these European countries. We are thinking that while social and political capital are more tied to local contexts, cultural capital is the one that has currency that is globally valued and that people can take with them outside their nation or community setting. Hypothesis that we had is that respondents to skill resources, cultural capital will have will be more favorable, will have actually more positive attitudes toward this cultural openness and cultural diversity. In that sense, the research question was, does high level of cultural capital and what type of cultural capital lead to high level of cultural openness and diversity. So this was our main variables. So we from the survey that we did, and it was based on 40,000 respondents in all 9 countries. We used this cosmopolitan index that actually was conducted on the 5 items concerning openness toward other cultures. Like I enjoy exchanging ideas with people from other cultures and similar items. We use indicator of institutional cultural capital that we use a level of education of respondents and their parents. And also we use embodied cultural capital, and we for that use cultural participation index that was constructed based on the few four items about cultural practices, elite folk online practices, and so on. So to somehow answer our research questions, we did a multiple regression analysis, and we use not only cultural capital as criteria, we also use a number of other social structural variables that are potentially important to explaining these attitudes. So we include gender, age, income, possession, residence, and where they're born in the country or not. The results are here in this table, and we try to answer this question: who is more open toward other cultures? And our main result, I would say, is that actually cultural participation has the highest effect on cultural openness. That means that the responded with higher level of participation had the highest were the most open toward others. Also, so maybe this is a more readable table. Also education of respondents. So this institutionalized capital played important roles. So in almost in every country except Switzerland and Croatia, higher education had a significant also impact on cultural openness. These are the key findings concerning the influence of level and type of capital toward cultural openness. Other variable as age, income, father and mother's education had less influence, but resident status, people from respondents from urban area and those who were migrants were actually more open toward others. So in this sense, we actually wanted to find out how this cultural capital is linked to this cultural dimension of cosmopolitanism or cultural openness toward other, and it was interesting to find that the cultural participation really actually in that sense matters, and it has a strong, it was strongest predictor in that sense. Also, respondent education has moderate effect in most countries. In some countries, that effect was not found. The effect on inherited cultural capital it was small, cultural education of mother and fathers of parents did not have effect as such. In general, the finding that we also have here that female participants are more culturally open. Age has a different effect in different countries. That was interesting. In Serbia, older respondents were more open toward others. In Denmark and UK, younger. And a place where they live, or urban areas, I would say some kind of meeting point for different cultures. There was significant also migrant experience, I would say, also. So this is the work in process. This is the one element that we were interested in, and we surely going to have. Will broaden this paper with the effect of other capitals and other type of cosmopolitan dimensions like political, economic. So that was the part in this paper that was the focus of this paper.
Okay, now we'll present one more case about these different notions of culture. We realized while doing analysis that there are in fact cultural microcosms in Europe. That in these 9 societies there are very small niches which are rather different from each other, which means that it's not possible to cover all these different attitudes towards culture, conceptions of culture, cultural practices with a single cultural policy. The cultural policy within the country needs to be plural. So as I mentioned, one of the starting points was that we realized that there are multiple, sometimes even conflicting concepts of culture and understanding of social values and culture in different social groups in terms of demographic, socioeconomic, ethnic, religious, and so on. And that it produces policy ambiguities in cultural policy and also produces mismatch between cultural ends and cultural needs. So this is one of the things that we wanted to research. The inspiration came from Herbert Gansel, elite culture and popular, high culture and popular culture. And he, within the same society, within the states, identified 5 different taste publics of 5 different taste cultures. And they have, according to him, different standards, aesthetic standards, and different social values. And we wanted to see whether something like this is going on in Europe, and it's a very synthetic, it's an article based on very synthetic data, which includes conceptions of culture. We ask that we give them 20 different items, from opera to hiking, from tattoos to realities, and ask them, does this belong to culture according to you? We analyze also this. We also ask about attitudes towards culture. We ask about cultural practices, as I mentioned, everyday life, popular culture, elite culture. We ask about online practices and media practices and so on. And first, we try to identify these aggregates which have similar conceptions of culture, attitudes towards culture, aesthetic standards, then to compare them in different countries. And finally, to analyze them in terms of their composition, demographic, social. And we conducted first multiple correspondence analysis and then hierarchical cluster analysis, and this is the cluster that we got. For example, in Serbia, you have one group which we call voracious omnivores. This is the group of people who are cosmopolitans, liberal, young, live mostly in capital cities, university education, highest income and possessions. And then there is a group with similar demographic characteristics, but they are unexpectedly very conservative. And they are the people who practice art. They are the ones who play instruments. They are the ones who make movies and so on. Then we have those that we call neoliberal wannabes. These are the people who disregard all the alternative forms of culture. So tattoos, not culture, cartoons, not culture, culture is only opera, theater, and so on. But when you analyze their social standing, you see that they are really of average needs. They are They are not cultural elite. They are people with mostly college education, but most of them high school education with moderate economic means. And they agree with all these neoliberal dogmas that if people are not looking for a job, they should not be given social benefits. I don't know. So we call them neoliberal wannabes. They try to use culture as a social status thing. They would like to promote themselves. And we have another group which we call alternative seekers. They are real contrast to the previous one. They are the ones who enjoy cartoons, tattoos, and this sort of stuff. Alternative music. They are trying to live alternative lifestyles and so on. Then we have like this group, culture is not for the likes of us. Usually in rural area, usually old people and so on. Although I don't believe in that there are people who are non-participants. Everybody participates in some cultural activity. You just need to find a proper indicator. But for most the indicator that we use, they participate at least only on everyday cultural activities. So they declare themselves not to be. And then in Croatia, we have let's call it urban pop squad. Young who live mostly in capital cities enjoy only popular cultural forms and high income, second highest level of possessions. Then you have these voracious omnivores. We have also a group, small group, again, very old people living in villages who are really conservative and really care about only national culture, exclude everything which is international. Then in France, we have, as we could expect for France, cosmopolitan cultural elite living in Paris and rural areas, highest income, highest possession, and so on. We also have like those who are home centers, mass media spectators and listeners, only television, radio, sometimes internet, don't participate in any other activities. In Spain, we have a group which is called Internet Geeks, which means only internet activities, nothing else. We have these avid popular culture consumers. In Denmark, we have a group which we call Let's Get Physical, because for them is recreation areas, sport events, and nothing else. Basically, in these 5 countries that we analyzed so far, we identified 14 different microcosms, very different in terms of the practices, attitudes towards culture, their conceptions of culture, and so on. Wait. And the implication of what we presented today, and some of them from our general research. First, that scientific research on culture is important, but not this evidence-based collection, how many visitors, how many tickets, it doesn't say. But when you, especially when you have the ability to speak with people in interviews, in focus groups, it's completely different. This is, you don't get this who attends, who don't attend, why, and so on. Then, that, as I mentioned, the impact of social inequalities is the highest on non-participation, because inequalities basically exclude people from cultural life, at least from art-related cultural activities, or in some cases for any type of cultural activities, because then you have to work 2 or 3 jobs per day, so you don't have time to do it. Also, that there is a clear link between the level of digital competence in all cultural practices that we study. Also mentioned that it should be included even if you study only on-site or offline cultural activities. Then that these online, offline is not valid. It's you can conventionally say, but it's a false dichotomy. That in European societies we have both forces leading towards homogenization and towards heterogeneity. And funny enough, homogenization goes between cities, between countries. So European countries become more and more similar to one another. But within these countries, there are these forces of heterogeneity, as shown in these cultural microcosms, so that there are small niches. And Richard Peterson, in his final article on omnivoreness, he was claiming that we might approach post-omnivore period, in which there will be small market niches and companies serving these niches, and people basically losing connection with people dealing with other issues. So there is a danger related to social cohesion. And that there is a clear link between cultural participation and openness towards culture, and what Željka presented, and more like a general conclusion that our research seems to indicate that culture participation cultivates empathy. And empathy is the feeling that neoliberal capitalism hates the most. Because if you're empathic with other people, you don't see it as only as competitors. And I think it's a crucial one for social and cultural policy. So this is it. I think we are hoping that we are on time.